What's up guys, Rogue9 here, and in today's video I want to take you on a little journey back through time. Back to the earliest development stages of Rainbow Six Siege up to 3 years before the actual launch of the game, and I want to explore how the early designs and core concepts for the game translated into the experience we are all familiar with now. So get your popcorn ready, make yourselves comfortable, and let's go! Rainbow Six Siege. We say that name nowadays often without thinking too much about how it gives us an indication of one of the 4 core principles that have underpinned the game since its very inception: the siege. The concept of 2 opposing forces going to battle in and around a fortified structure. One team reinforcing and defending from within, the other breaching those defenses from the outside. This was the founding principle behind the latest installment in the Rainbow Six series. Details of the concept of a siege and how it would be realized within a first-person shooter game were captured as early as January 2013, as can be seen in some of the handwritten developer notes captured by creative director Xavier Marquis at the time. The ideas that defenders should be able to reinforce doors and windows, that barbed wire could be used as an internal obstacle, and that there should be 2 types of wall, destructible and indestructible, all originated at the very beginning of the development process. The idea of deployable cover within the buildings was another cornerstone of the defense that was envisioned from the very beginning of the project. Wait a minute, is that a concept drawing of a pixel peak? Toxic. Nevertheless, this early idea made it into the game as the deployable shields that we have all been familiar with for the last 3 years now. But there were also some really early defensive ideas that did not make it into the launch version of the game. Concept art and animated clips show off an ambitious idea for a dynamic reinforcement system that included the use of movable furniture as barricades, as well as an outrageous notion that buildings in Rainbow Six Siege would actually have doors, and that these doors could be reinforced with gadgets and even furniture. These complex concepts were quickly swept aside though, and the design reverted to the much simpler and more elegant solution of using wooden barricades for doorways and windows and metal reinforcements for breachable walls. Once the ideas for these systems were finalized on paper, the animations were motion captured, and it is amazing to see these movements that we all know so well from the in-game operators performed in real life.
Action. Allez, position et action. Ok, Thibaut.
Action. Allez, vas-y. C'est bon.
But reinforcing for defenders represents only half of the mechanics that would be required to fulfill the core premise of recreating a siege. The attacking team would need the tools and abilities to overcome these obstacles thrown at them by the defenders. In parallel to the concepts for reinforcements, the Rainbow Six dev team began to design breaching mechanics that would round out the gameplay experience. Very early on, while the ideas of using furniture and blocking doors were still on the table, counterplay options for the attacker team were also being considered, but once the decision was made to keep reinforcing simple and straightforward, the attacking options could be simplified at the same time. Attackers would be able to melee or shoot their way in through barricaded doorways and windows, they were able to use explosives on barricades and soft walls, and shield operators, with the help of a teammate, would be able to run straight through soft walls and wreak havoc on the other side. Please note that not all of these early concepts made it into the final version of the game. And maybe that's a good thing. Shields are quite controversial at the moment anyway, and now imagine them bursting through an unreinforced wall right in front of you. Another early idea that ended up being dropped was persistent damage, the idea that map destruction would carry over from round to round. I personally think that it makes sense for this idea to have been scrapped. How is it supposed to work when the teams switch sides? Does the team that attacks in round 2 get to take advantage of the breaches made by the other team beforehand? And if the damage to the map is persistent, then how can operators that were killed in round 1 come back to fight on the same map again? In my opinion, permanent destruction would have been hard to justify both from a realism perspective as well as balancing perspective, but do feel free to leave your thoughts in the comment section below. Would you have liked to see this mechanic make it into the game? One last early idea that ended up not making it into the game on launch is showcased as a bit of a side note in the destruction concept footage, and it almost flies under the radar. As early back as December 2013, there were already plans to potentially include claymores in the game as defender weapons, but of course these gadgets were not implemented until the mid-season reinforcements patch during Operation Skull Rain, almost 1 year after the release of the game, and as we all know, they are being used by attackers now. Besides the core concept of recreating a siege in a modern tactical shooter, there are 3 other concepts that Rainbow Six Siege was founded on: intel, tactical movement, and a hero character concept to enforce tight team play and communication. Intel as a fundamental design concept of Rainbow Six Siege was part of the discussion from the very beginning of the project and was eventually broken down into 2 different topics: audio and visual intel. Some of the earliest concept footage for the game actually still includes a minimap system wherein each player would be able to see the positions of themselves, their teammates, and the objective once discovered. Every teammate, camera, or drone also had a cone of vision that would automatically mark enemy players on the minimap as long as they were in view, and would leave behind a red question mark for enemies that were no longer in view. This system was dropped rather quickly though, and to me this once again makes perfect sense because a live minimap would have caused all kinds of problems in a game with destructible walls. Imagine playing Siege but the enemy knows exactly where you are at all times. Preposterous. And so this crude and overpowered system gave way to far subtler ideas. Sound was always envisioned as being an important source of information in Siege, with a strong ambition of creating a detailed system of realistic sound propagation. Sound should be conveyed to the player not just in terms of the position of the source, but also taking into consideration any obstacles that would block or redirect the passage of sound. This lofty objective has always been a polarizing topic because, as awesome as it is to have a detailed system such as this, it has also always caused a significant amount of confusion among newer players. Hearing an enemy approaching from the left because of an open doorway or breach when the player is actually straight ahead can be really counterintuitive for new players. And then of course there is also the issue that the complexity of this sound system makes it difficult to maintain, and sadly the last few seasonal updates in Year 3 and going into Year 4 have come with significant sound issues. Hopefully future seasons will bring us more reliable sound and the game will return to the form it deserves to be in. But sound is only one part of the intel concept in Rainbow Six Siege. During early development, 3 different forms of visual intel were being considered: a camera network with fixed and controllable cameras, a flying Scan Eagle drone that would provide a circling camera feed of the outside of the building, and player-operated ground-based drones. The Scan Eagle proved to be not very useful as the game developed and the idea was shelved, although in a way the concept did finally re-emerge as Lion's dreaded EE-1D drone. The other 2 concepts made it into the game, although both underwent some refinement. The early idea of using a mixture of static and rotating cameras was simplified into using just controllable cameras, but that's not really the most significant change in terms of the camera network. This single bullet point that was added to the concept sheet later on in a different color tells us that the cameras can be destroyed by the defenders, And at first this might seem odd. Why would the defenders want to destroy the cameras? The answer to that question becomes clear when we examine this early storyboard explaining the gameplay purpose of the camera network. The initial idea was that the cameras were not in fact used by the defenders, but that the attackers would be able to access it in order to gather information on the defensive setup. This initial idea kind of makes sense when you think back to previous Tom Clancy games in the Rainbow Six or Splinter Cell series. You were always able to gather info on your opponents before beginning an attack. But of course, for Rainbow Six Siege, it became evident that this concept would not work. Making the cameras indestructible would give the attackers a huge advantage, but destructible cams would only act as a time waster for the defenders during the prep phase, forcing the team to run around the map, taking all of them out. The decision to switch the cam network over to the defenders became a no-brainer and helped bring balance to the intel aspect of the game. Defenders have cameras, attackers have drones. The attacker drones also underwent significant refinement before the final launch of the game. For instance, initially drones were not supposed to be able to climb stairs while still being able to descend. And even more importantly, early designs for the drones envisioned them as being armed with explosive charges, incapacitating gas, or smoke. With the power of hindsight and the game now being more than 3 years old, it is easy to see that giving each and every drone those offensive capabilities would have been completely overpowered, but those ludicrous ideas weren't immediately squashed. Concept drawings show us the development of the drones into their final form, both in terms of additional abilities such as climbing stairs and jumping, as well as the development of their visual form. And as we can see here, these concept developments still included options like a flash ability, an electroshock ability that would stun enemies, and also a smoke or gas ability. Luckily though, these oppressive concepts were retired well before the launch of the game, and most operators, apart from Twitch, received an Intel-only version of the drone. Core concept number 3 underpinning the gameplay experience of Rainbow Six Siege is the movement. The idea was to create a movement system that felt somewhat heavy and deliberate compared to other games at the time, with highly nuanced movement abilities depending on the situation that your character was currently in. Whether this goal was achieved in the final version of the game is debatable, especially with the rise of the 3-speed meta over the years, but there was one unique aspect of the character movement that was seen as vital by the developers in terms of distinguishing Rainbow Six Siege from other first-person shooters, and that was the ability for attackers to rappel up and down the outside of buildings. Great attention was paid to the implementation of this system. The devs worked with external consultants who had military and law enforcement backgrounds to ensure that the rappelling movements were captured in a way that was realistic but at the same time fulfilled the functional needs of the player in-game. And finally, last but certainly not least, there is the 4th pillar upon which Rainbow Six Siege was founded. A hero system with unique operators that all bring different utility and weapon loadouts to the team, and who only have one life throughout each round. Interestingly though, this core feature of the game was not planned from the very beginning of the development process. Early designs for the game featured a class-based character system and mid-round respawns. The video in the background shows off an early internal Rainbow Six Siege dev team tournament that features both of these concepts in a match taking place on a pre-alpha prototype of the Hereford map. Not long after this early playtest and esports proof of concept event, the decision was made that respawning has no place in Rainbow Six Siege. Having only one life would increase the tactical realism, force the player to think and make the operator gadgets more useful, improve the narrative of the class system, and transform all game modes into quasi-team deathmatch, the most popular game mode in the world. Or at least that was the assumption back in 2014. Battle Royale games hadn't really hit the mainstream back then yet. So respawns are off the table, but at this stage, the class system is still very much part of Rainbow Six Siege. One of Xavier Marquis' concept sheets we saw earlier lists initial ideas for 3 different classes for the attacking and defending teams respectively, including Assault, Tactical Assault, Support, and Sniper classes. Later designs had been more refined, with the attacking team featuring the Assaulter, Point Man, and Sniper classes, while the defenders could pick from the Trapper, Protector, and Blocker. Each class distinguished itself along a variety of different stats such as primary and secondary weapons, armor class, movement speed, and primary and secondary gadgets. But around the midpoint of 2014, around 18 months before the official release of the game, the decision was made to switch the class-based system over to a hero-based system where every character comes with unique strategic abilities that help to reinforce cooperation and team play. Xavier Marquis outlined his vision for the creation of believable heroes in this rule sheet. The key question was, how do we create hero powers without them being negatively affected by the established universe of Rainbow Six as a realistic military shooter series, but also without breaking that universe? The idea was that on a sliding scale from realistic to magic, the central part, rather dramatically referred to as
the Black Zone,
should be avoided at all costs, and this principle led to 3 rules for the creation of heroes, and I do want to take a moment to quickly go over these rules because the topic of realism in Rainbow Six Siege has been a recurring discussion point within the game's community. So rule number 1, powers may be derived from believable reality. Rule number 2, powers can be derived from magic as long as they conform to universal gameplay conventions. And rule number 3, never justify in-game magic with explanations within the Siege universe. If magic, such as respawns, is already accepted by the players by universal convention, then trying to explain this magic is unnecessary and only endangers the game's realistic foundations as a tactical shooter. An example for gameplay magic that would not be acceptable in Rainbow Six Siege is given as an energy force field. This mixture of magic and reality would take the game beyond the intended technological universe. An example provided to explain acceptable magic are respawns. Of course, there are no respawns in real life, but when it comes to video games, they are simply accepted as a gameplay element without requiring an explanation and are therefore believable, especially in a multiplayer setting. So this basically boils down to Siege is a realistic game and there shall be no magic, no sci-fi, unless it is part of generally accepted video games convention. And of course, as we all know, this rule has not really stood the test of time. You could argue that Frost, Buck, Valkyrie, Blackbeard, Capitao, and even Caveira are sort of realistic and believable, but by the end of year 1, we already saw Hibana and Echo added into the game, and their gadgets are pretty sci-fi. By the time Velvet Shell came around during Season 1 of Year 2, the original requirements had been totally scrapped and we got Jackal, who has a visor that can scan coloured footprints off of the ground, which will then reveal the identity and current location of an enemy, and then continue to ping them every few seconds going forward. Yeah, I believe that Jackal would definitely fall into the category of what Xavier Marquis had originally labelled as unacceptable magic. But to be fair, even some of the launch operators are probably already beyond the realm of reality. You could argue that both IQ with her Spectre electronics detector, and certainly Thatcher with his handheld EMP grenades already fell into the
Black Zone,
that terrifying and deadly space between magic and reality. And even though this rule was eventually broken, I think it's remarkable how Xavier was able to predict the reaction of the Rainbow Six fans. The fact is that over the years there have been a lot of players that were pretty upset and disappointed about the fact that sci-fi gadgets and abilities were added into the game. But sci-fi or not, imagine if the early concept of a class-based system had stayed in the game. Imagine if we didn't have unique operators with unique gadgets and weapons and background stories. I think it is safe to say that Rainbow Six Siege would have been quite a different game. And I think it is also arguable that I would not be making this video right now and you wouldn't be watching it because none of us would be playing Siege anymore. Maybe many of you who joined the game at the end of year 1 or in year 2 or 3 would never have played it in the first place. Without the seasonal rhythm to Rainbow Six Siege, with 2 new operators being introduced 4 times a year, I highly doubt that the game could have been as successful as it has been, both in terms of attracting a significant player base as well as in terms of becoming a successful esport. I suppose that CSGO managed to achieve all of these goals without a hero system, so maybe Siege could have done the same? I guess we'll never know. And that concludes our little trip back through time, exploring how the 4 core concepts of the game, the principle of the siege with reinforcing and breaching, the focus on intel, the unique movement including repelling, and the hero system, how all of these concepts were established throughout the game's development process, and how the unique combination of these fundamental ideas brought us the game we have today. If you want to see more Rainbow Six videos, go ahead and click the playlist in the top left-hand corner now. If you want to see something different, maybe my recent video on the top 10 Easter eggs in Far Cry New Dawn will interest you. That's the video in the bottom left. Subscribe if you want to follow my future work, and until then, I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next episode.